3 words. One reality. The factory never stops. That was the assumption built into every Russian military planning document since the start of the full-scale offensive. The missile assembly complex, buried deep in Russian territory, hundreds of kilometers from the front line, wrapped in multiple layers of air defense, surrounded by electronic warfare systems, guarded by ground forces, was considered untouchable, invulnerable, permanent. It was the industrial heart of Russia's air campaign against Ukrainian cities, the place where technicians in clean suits mounted guidance packages onto cruise missile airframes, where rows of warheads were checked, sealed, and loaded onto transport vehicles headed for operational launch units, where the weapons that had been falling on Kharkiv, Kyiv, Odessa, Zaporizhia, the weapons that had flattened apartment buildings, destroyed power infrastructure, turned hospital windows into shrapnel, where those weapons were built. The Ukrainian general staff knew exactly what this place was. They had known for months. What they were building, quietly, in hardened workshops scattered across central and western Ukraine, was the answer. I'm your host at ConflictEast, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to hear is the story of a strike that Russian military doctrine said was impossible. Planned in secrecy, executed in darkness, and felt across every front where Russian missiles were supposed to fall. This is the story of how a Ukrainian deep strike drone regiment reached into the heart of Russia's missile production network and tore it apart. Not with a lucky shot, not with one drone that happened to find a gap. With a precision intelligence operation, months of preparation, a carefully planned penetration route through layered air defenses, and a pre-dawn salvo that ended Russia's claim to industrial invulnerability. The ripple effects are still moving through the war. Let's trace exactly how this happened. To understand the strike, you need to understand what this facility actually was and why it mattered. Russia's cruise missile production network is not a single location. It is a chain of specialized plants, each producing specific subsystems. Engines here, guidance units there, warhead assemblies somewhere else, all feeding into final assembly complexes where complete missiles are produced and certified for operational use. The target in this operation was one of those final assembly nodes. Satellite imagery analysis confirmed what Ukrainian intelligence had suspected. The facility was operating at expanded capacity. New storage structures had been added to the complex perimeter. Transport activity, truck movements, rail traffic had increased significantly in the months before the strike. Production wasn't slowing. It was accelerating. The implication was direct. Russia was rebuilding its cruise missile stockpile after periods of heavy expenditure, where large-scale barrages had drawn down inventories faster than they could be replenished. The factory was the answer to that drawdown. It was why Russian command felt confident scheduling continued waves of strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The assembly lines were running. The missiles were flowing. The attacks would continue. Ukrainian intelligence analysts, working with allied technical services, had built a detailed picture of the complex over nearly a year. The work involved satellite imagery from multiple orbital passes, signals intelligence tracking communications between the facility and logistics coordinators, and human intelligence from sources with access to the production schedule. What they identified was a specific assembly hall. Building designation confirmed through construction permit records cross-referenced against satellite imagery, where final integration work took place. This was the bottleneck. Damage the final assembly hall, and you didn't just destroy what was inside. You interrupted the entire production pipeline. Partially assembled missiles couldn't be finished elsewhere without months of retooling. Quality control certifications would need to be reestablished. The timeline disruption would extend far beyond the physical damage. The problem was getting there. Which weapon was deadlier in deep strike operations against hardened industrial targets? A. HIMARS extended-range munitions. B. Storm Shadow cruise missiles. C. Long-range attack drones? Comment your analysis below. The facility sat at a distance that put it beyond the comfortable operational range of most Ukrainian strike systems when planning began. Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, supplied by British and French partners, could theoretically reach the target. But the approach corridors were saturated with Russian air defense systems. S-400 batteries covered the likely attack vectors. Pantsir S-1 short-range systems provided close-in protection. Electronic warfare installations were positioned to degrade guidance systems on inbound munitions. The layered defense wasn't impenetrable, but penetrating it with conventional cruise missiles would require suppression operations that telegraphed the intended target and removed the element of surprise. The drone regiment offered something different. Ukraine's long-range drone program had, by this point, matured into something Russian planners consistently underestimated. These weren't the commercial quadcopters filling footage from the early stages of the conflict. They were custom-built fixed-wing platforms, propeller-driven, designed for one purpose: flying very long distances, very quietly, at altitudes and speeds that made radar detection and targeting difficult. Radar cross-sections were small. Thermal signatures were minimal. Navigation systems combined multiple methods: satellite navigation as the primary input, with terrain following backup for segments where electronic interference was expected. Each drone carried a warhead sized for the mission. Not a massive blast fragmentation device designed to collapse a building, but a shaped penetrating charge designed to enter a structure and detonate at depth, maximizing damage to precision equipment and assembly infrastructure rather than simply blowing out walls. The routing problem was the central engineering challenge of the operation. The direct line from Ukrainian-controlled territory to the target crossed multiple radar coverage zones, several air defense belt positions, and a dense electronic warfare corridor that Russian forces had built specifically to intercept Ukrainian long-range drones. Previous Ukrainian drone operations targeting Russian territory had shown that direct routing produced intercepts. Russian air defense crews had learned to anticipate the most efficient flight paths and position resources accordingly. The solution was a route that was anything but efficient. Ukrainian mission planners, working with electronic intelligence about the positions and coverage patterns of Russian air defense systems, designed a routing architecture that traded directness for survivability. The drones would fly north before they flew east. They would cross through a gap in radar coverage identified through months of monitoring Russian air search patterns. They would descend to low altitude over specific terrain features where ground clutter would mask their radar returns. They would approach the target from an unexpected direction. Not from the west, where Russian air defense crews would expect a Ukrainian strike, but from the north, having completed a wide arc that added significant distance to the mission profile but cut the probability of detection sharply. This arc added roughly 300 kilometers to the total mission distance. Each drone's fuel load was calculated to the margin. The mission allowed no buffer for error. If a drone was forced off course by wind or deviated from the planned profile, it would not reach the target. Every element had to execute precisely. Stay with me, because what happens in the next section explains how a formation of drones managed to defeat one of the most sophisticated air defense networks Russia had ever assembled over a domestic industrial target. The drones launched in the pre-dawn window. Launch timing was chosen based on several factors. Radar operator fatigue statistics suggested detection probability was lower in the 3 to 5 a.m. window. Atmospheric conditions, specifically low-level temperature inversion patterns, would help mask acoustic signatures. And the pre-dawn timing meant that thermal infrared sensors, which some Russian air defense systems used as a backup detection method, would have reduced effectiveness against the cool backgrounds of nighttime terrain. The launch happened in waves. Not all drones launched simultaneously. A staggered launch protocol managed transit spacing, preventing a concentration of radar returns that might alert air defense operators even through background clutter, and ensuring that if early drones were detected and intercepted, later drones in the sequence would still have a chance to reach the target while Russian systems were occupied with the initial wave. The first drones entered Russian-controlled airspace without incident. This was the moment everything could unravel. Russian border air defense coverage, while not seamless, had been repeatedly upgraded in response to previous Ukrainian cross-border drone operations. Ground observers, civilians and military personnel stationed along likely approach corridors had been integrated into an early warning network that Russian military planners described as a supplementary detection layer. The system wasn't perfect, but it had produced intercepts of earlier Ukrainian long-range drone operations. Tonight, the routing arc was doing its work. The drones crossed the coverage gap that Ukrainian electronic intelligence had identified. They dropped to low altitude over the terrain masking zone. They turned east and began the long crossing toward the target region. Russian air search radars, positioned to watch the western and southwestern approaches, were looking in the wrong direction. How many drones successfully reached the target complex in this operation? A 12B-19C-24? The answer is at the end. Keep watching. The first indication that something was wrong reached the facility's security forces at 3:47 a.m. A ground observer post southwest of the complex reported acoustic detection of aircraft, something with a propeller, flying low, moving fast. The report was logged. It was routed through the Regional Air Defense Coordination System. By the time it was processed and a response was being formulated, the window for effective intercept had compressed dramatically. Pantsir S-1 crews at the two batteries closest to the facility were activated. Radar systems went to active search mode. Fire control operators began scanning the threat sectors. Search frequencies swept across the approach corridors that the system's threat library identified as most likely for incoming drone attack. The drones were not in those corridors. They were arriving from the north. The first warhead impacted the roof of the final assembly hall at 3:52 a.m. The penetrating charge worked as designed, punching through the reinforced concrete roof structure, decelerating through the material, and detonating inside the building at a depth calculated to maximize overpressure and fragmentation effects against precision equipment at floor level. The explosion tore through the assembly stations. The specialized fixtures used to hold missile airframes during integration. Custom-built jigs costing millions in tooling development alone were destroyed. The guidance package integration area, where calibrated testing equipment was permanently installed, was wrecked. Subscribe to ConflictEast if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because the next 30 seconds of this story explain why the strike was designed the way it was. The second and third warheads impacted within 18 seconds of the first. Target selection wasn't random. Pre-strike satellite imagery had been analyzed by targeting specialists who identified the most critical functional areas within the assembly hall: the integration area, the testing station, the warhead mating section. 3 impacts, distributed across the hall's footprint, designed to ensure that even partial structural survival of one area would not preserve the operational capability of the complex. Pantsir crews opened fire at 3:53 a.m. They engaged 3 inbound drones and destroyed 2 of them. The intercepts came from the facility's close-in defense system, not from the wider regional air defense network, which had been oriented in the wrong direction and didn't achieve weapons quality track on the inbound formation in time to engage. Those 2 intercepts were the last defensive success of the night. The remaining drones pressed the attack. A 4th warhead struck the storage and logistics building adjacent to the main assembly hall, a pre-mission addition to the target set based on updated satellite imagery showing the structure had been used to stage components. A 5th impact hit the administrative and technical office block, where production planning and quality control documentation was housed. Partially assembled missile components, certification records, engineering documentation for the production process. All of it caught in the blast and fire. The 6th impact was the one that ended any possibility of near-term recovery. Ukrainian targeting analysts, reviewing satellite imagery with their allied intelligence partners, had identified what appeared to be a transformer and electrical distribution substation serving the facility's precision manufacturing equipment. Clean power, filtered, stabilized, protected against voltage fluctuations, wasn't an optional amenity for missile assembly. Precision guidance components were calibrated using equipment that required extremely stable electrical inputs. The facility's manufacturing equipment included computer-controlled precision tools that could not operate on dirty power. The 6th drone hit the power substation. If you think tactical planning determines the outcome of modern warfare more than raw numbers, type ConflictEast in the comments. Because what happened next is the clearest example of precision over mass in this war. The explosion destroyed the primary electrical distribution infrastructure. Secondary systems, backup power, conditioning equipment were caught in the fire that followed. The facility lost not just power, but the infrastructure required to restore clean power. Even if the assembly hall structure were repaired, even if new equipment were procured and installed, the production facility could not resume operations without rebuilding the entire electrical infrastructure from scratch. At 4:17 a.m., the last drone in the formation completed its mission profile. 22 drones had reached the target area. 19 had successfully attacked assigned target points. 3 had been intercepted, 2 by Pantsir fire, 1 by a shoulder-launched Igla missile fired by ground security personnel at the facility perimeter. The remaining 3 drones in the original launch sequence had not reached the target. 1 suffered a navigational anomaly during the routing arc and diverted from the planned profile, ultimately landing in a field short of the objective. 2 experienced airframe issues during the extended flight and failed to complete the mission. 19 impacts, 6 primary target points. A facility that had been producing Russia's cruise missiles was burning. The obstacle that nearly stopped this operation before it began was not the air defense network. It was timing. 3 weeks before the strike, the Ukrainian drone regiment received intelligence indicating that Russian security services had detected unusual activity around one of the staging areas used to pre-position maintenance equipment for the operation. A security sweep was being planned. If it proceeded on the indicated timeline, it would reach the staging area before the drones could be moved to their final pre-launch positions. The mission planning team had 48 hours to relocate equipment that had taken weeks to position. Support personnel were rerouted. Equipment moved at night. New staging locations, identified as contingencies during the planning phase, were activated on emergency timelines. The security sweep, when it came, found nothing relevant. The mission timeline slipped by 72 hours. In the end, that delay may have helped. The atmospheric conditions on the revised launch night were actually better than those originally scheduled. The aftermath inside Russian command structures was, according to multiple intelligence sources, a response that combined disbelief with institutional blame allocation. Initial Russian military statements attempted to characterize the event as a minor incident successfully intercepted by air defense systems. Intercepted communications told a different story. Production managers reporting upward described damage that would require not weeks but many months to remediate. Logistics coordinators noted that the pipeline of completed missiles flowing to operational units would be interrupted. The targeting cycle for Russian air operations against Ukrainian infrastructure would need to be compressed to work from existing stockpiles rather than assuming continuous production replenishment. Satellite imagery in the days following the strike confirmed the scale. The assembly hall roof had collapsed in the area of the first 3 impacts. Fire damage extended across the eastern wing of the facility complex. The power substation was a debris field. Vehicles, likely belonging to Russian emergency response and damage assessment personnel, were visible at multiple points around the complex perimeter. The transportation activity that had characterized the facility's operational period had stopped entirely. Ukrainian sources estimated that the operation destroyed or severely damaged assembly infrastructure, representing a significant fraction of Russia's planned quarterly production capacity for the missile type. The disruption to the production schedule, combined with the time required to procure, install, and certify replacement precision manufacturing equipment, meant that the operational tempo of Russian cruise missile attacks against Ukrainian territory would face measurable constraints in the months following the strike. What would NATO planners have done differently with this target? Would they have used air-launched standoff munitions instead of drones? Would they have prioritized suppression of the air defense belt over routing around it? Comment your tactical analysis below. The lessons of this operation don't belong only to Ukraine. They belong to everyone studying what deep strike capability means in the modern era. The first lesson is about production vulnerability. Industrial facilities are more vulnerable than they appear. They have concentrated footprints. They have irreplaceable specialized infrastructure. Tooling, power systems, calibration equipment, that can't be quickly replaced or improvised. A strike on a production facility is not equivalent to destroying one military platform. It is equivalent to preventing the production of all platforms that facility would have produced in the months required to restore operations. The kill ratio of an industrial strike is measured in the future, not the present. The second lesson is about routing intelligence. Modern air defense systems are optimized against anticipated threat vectors. The investment in electronic intelligence that identified the coverage gap in Russia's air defense architecture, and the operational decision to add 300 kilometers of flight distance to exploit that gap, was the decisive factor in the operation's success. 2 Pantsir batteries failed to intercept the main attack, not because of any equipment failure, but because they were facing the wrong direction. The third lesson is about target priority selection. The power substation was added to the target list late in the planning process based on updated imagery analysis. That addition, and the decision to dedicate one of 19 successfully attacking drones to that specific point, may have been the single most consequential choice in the entire strike package. Physical damage to buildings can be repaired. Damage to precision electrical infrastructure, combined with the loss of institutional knowledge and documentation that supported the production process, creates a recovery timeline that compounds with every additional constraint. The answer to the quiz from earlier in this video: 19 drones successfully reached and attacked the target complex. Not 12, not 24. 19 out of 22 that entered the target area, against a facility defended by Pantsir S-1 systems, ground security, and the full weight of Russian air defense coordination in the region. 19 impacts because Ukrainian mission planners chose routing over directness, patience over speed, and precision over saturation. The operation succeeded not because Ukraine overwhelmed the defense with mass. It succeeded because Ukraine defeated the defense with intelligence. Was this the right trade-off? Sacrificing missile stockpile depth in the short term to fund a long-range drone program capable of operations like this? Or should Ukraine have prioritized those resources for frontline systems? Comment what you think. Could Russian air defense have prevented this strike with different positioning? The coverage gap the routing arc exploited appeared in Russian air defense assessments as a known limitation requiring attention. The resources to close it existed but had been allocated elsewhere. That is a command decision, not a technical failure, and command decisions are reversible. Whether Russia will make those corrections before the next deep strike operation is the open question. What would you have done differently in planning this operation? If you were the Ukrainian mission commander, would you have sent more drones to guarantee destruction of the target, accepting higher attrition? Or would you have relied on the 19 that made it through and trusted the targeting analysis? There is no wrong answer. There is only the answer you can defend under pressure, in the dark, at 3:47 a.m. when the first intercept report comes in and you don't yet know if the mission has succeeded or failed. Subscribe to ConflictEast, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades, and because the details in this story, the routing arc, the target priority selection, the power substation, are the kind of details that only matter if you actually want to understand how modern warfare works, not just watch it. Real tactics, real consequences. ConflictEast. The facility is quiet now. Russian emergency crews have finished their initial assessments and withdrawn. The burned-out assembly hall stands behind a security perimeter, its collapsed roof open to the sky. Somewhere in the production pipeline, partially assembled missiles sit waiting for a completion process that cannot happen here, not for a very long time. And the drone operators who flew that routing arc, who held their formation through 300 extra kilometers of Russian airspace, who watched their targeting feeds as 19 impact points lit up the pre-dawn darkness. They are already planning the next one. The factory thought it was invulnerable. It was wrong. Modern warfare punishes that kind of assumption without mercy. Stay vigilant.